Greetings. Today we're going to talk about how e-commerce has created a tremendous multi-layer technological disruption, and the creative destruction released by such is far more pervasive and deep than a lot of people realize, because what is occurring is that this is ongoing. You may think e-commerce is something that has already been pretty mature for quite a few years, but no, the biggest disruptions resultant from e-commerce and the displacement of brick and mortar retail are yet to come. So you first start off with this Federal Reserve chart from the Federal Reserve Economic Research Department. And this is the percent of all retail sales in the United States that are now e-commerce. And even though we thought of e-commerce as something from the dot-com era, the late 1990s and up to March 2000, the percentage of retail sales that were e-commerce even then was under 2% for a long time. 1%, only got to 2% as late as 2004. And then it started to quietly rise, but now it's risen more and more. And yes, there was a sharp increase because of COVID and a reduction of that as people return to old habits, but it still kind of is just meeting up with the trend line, and therefore it's about 13.3%. What does that mean? As more and more brick and mortar retail sales have been swallowed by e-commerce, we already see the effects of this in terms of retail stores shutting down and entire strip malls that have shuttered and are waiting for demolition and repurposement. But e-commerce can be described as something that had two revolutions. One was just the act of buying something over the internet itself. People today don't even remember this, but back in about 1997, a lot of people were afraid to buy anything over the internet because the notion of putting your credit card number into a website and letting the vendor keep your credit card number was something that a lot of people were frightened about. And fortunately, things like digital asset protection, encryption, and the policies of the banks around credit card fraud and other internet scams has adapted to the point that e-commerce is possible. So while the action of just buying something online and having it delivered to your home is relatively mature, once that got to scale, then you get to another dimension. That's part two of the e-commerce revolution, which is the data revolution. The act of buying something on Amazon generates a lot of data, from consumer behavior to patterns of purchases to reviews and comparing reviews of products and things like that. And because e-commerce collects all this data, it does something that brick and mortar retail sales just don't do to anywhere near the same degree. And that data itself is valuable. It's not just that e-commerce products can be cheaper because they have less in the way of retail overhead and other such costs associated with them. The data collected from all these retail transactions is itself valuable. Amazon could lower a lot of its products' prices substantially and still make money just from the data collected by the increased purchases. And that is the second revolution of e-commerce. The Amazon.com shopping experience today is not very different than 5 years ago, 2016, right? So why has Amazon's stock price risen so much in the last 5 years? It has risen several fold in the last 5 years, and now it's a company of $1.7 trillion in market cap. That is because it has been repriced for the age of big data. The data being collected was not necessarily priced as having that much value back in 1998, 1999, and then 2002, 2003, 2004. But now, because of the critical mass of transactions and the data resultant from that, Amazon is now a company that is well over $1 trillion and closing in on $2 trillion simply because of the value of the data that is generated from its e-commerce and the other businesses associated with Amazon's core business that have themselves become very, very big, such as Amazon Web Services and so forth. So that is part two of the e-commerce revolution that is underway right now. And this percentage will keep on rising. It's 13.3%. But what happens when it's 20%, 25%? 30% even? What does that do to all the resources that are freed up from the closure and repurposement of brick and mortar retail? So for that, we go to this other chart. E-commerce is, of course, a worldwide phenomenon and is having these effects in all countries. However, some countries the effects are greater than others. Countries that never had an established organized retail sector, such as India, for example, are experiencing retail being leapfrogged by e-commerce. The small mom and pop shops were so politically powerful that large multinational retail chains were not allowed to enter India for a long time. But now that whole phase is being skipped because it's going directly to e-commerce. In the United States, there's a different problem, one of excessive retail land allocation. You see from this chart, in the United States, the amount of retail square footage per shopper is 6 times more than many other similar countries such as Britain, France, and Japan. It's more than twice as much as even Australia, which is a country that has a huge amount of land because of low population density. Why did the United States have so much land allocated to retail? Well, there were some peculiarities in the tax code that were set way back in 1954 that allowed for accelerated depreciation of this type of construction. So the country overbuilt these suburban shopping malls and strip malls at the expense of many other types of real estate, and now, many decades later, the distortion is being corrected by market forces. These big strip malls are very close to residential areas because the people have to shop there. That's why these zoning regulations are such that the retail is near housing, but since retail is being shuttered left and right, and as we've seen in other videos on this channel, commercial office space is also being shuttered. Those types of real estate are in extreme glut, and sticking with retail, this is acres and acres of land. When there's 6 times as much square footage within the store per shopper relative to other countries, think how big the parking lots are. And in the United States, these parking lots are gigantic. And it's not just the front of the building, but even the back of each retail store has a huge amount of land where the truck comes in and the products can be offloaded from the truck and stocked into the store. This is a huge amount of land in prime locations that will have to be repurposed because it cannot be used for anything else than residential, the only type of real estate that is still in substantial shortage in some parts of America. So that is one gale of creative destruction that is occurring. The e-commerce revolution is going to create a land bonanza because all this dead capital that has been locked up since 1954 in some cases in an excess allocation towards retail land and insufficient allocation of land for other sources is now going to be freed up. And I'm going to show you another chart about how quickly the closure of these stores could occur. This chart also from The Economist, and their source was Green Street Advisors. It only goes up to 2016, so by 2021, now we're seeing the fruits of this. The revenue earned by department stores was already dropping very substantially even several years ago and was 30% from its peak. And the retail floor space is a lagging indicator because the closure of these stores only follows 2, 3, or 4 years after the demand shrinks. So now that process is already underway in earnest. And that's why you see all these department stores closing all over the place in the United States. The sales are falling and therefore the footprint has to shrink. That is already underway. So what happens now that we have so much land in the middle of urban and suburban America that just does not need to be used for retail anymore? How will this repurposement take place, and will zoning laws allow this to happen in an orderly way at all or not? That is one of the battles that is ongoing. In California, they refuse to rezone defunct retail shopping malls that have been closed for years into residential housing. That happens here and there in very rare occasions, but after many years of litigation and political bickering. But market forces are going to exert more and more pressure because this is the creative destruction that is manifesting. And under atom principles, this comprises a lot of deflation because land, which is also a commodity, is something that is being freed up for a more productive use. Because having a bunch of shuttered strip malls is a representation of dead capital that could be used for something better. So watching this process unfold is informative and fascinating, and the retail apocalypse is a good thing because too much land was devoted to retail in the United States in the first place. Going to the mall or going to the multiplex in the mall is part of American culture. Everyone grew up doing that, but that's because so much land was devoted to those things. Market forces are demanding something else, and we are seeing this correction happen not a moment too soon. And the bonanza of land that is being released will eventually lead to much more enlightened and productive uses of that land. So I hope you found this video informative, and if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.